Namaste, Abhijit ji.
Namaste. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
So we'll be discussing today Indo-China relations with respect to China's renaming of parts of Arunachal Pradesh as South Tibet. How do you think that India should be viewing and dealing with this situation?
Right. So this is a standard Chinese practice. This is something they have been doing often. They've done this with respect to India in the past. Recently, they even renamed. I mean, they even issued maps recently renaming parts of the Russian Far East with Chinese names. So it's
Oh,
not something that they use to target only India. They are even doing it to Russia. Now, if you look at what global geopolitical commentators are saying, they are saying that Russia and China are best friends now. They're allies. They are working together. Well, when you are in an alliance, you don't do this to your allies, right? So the moral of the story, let me begin with that, is that the Chinese cannot be trusted by anybody, not even the Russians. So right now their interests align and they are working together because they are both facing pressure from the United States. But in the long run, Russia and China are not going to be allies, they're going to be adversaries. Now when it comes to China renaming certain Indian place names to Chinese names, what should India do about this? What India should do is establish proper facts on the ground. They can issue maps and rename various parts of India with Chinese names and Chinese characters. That is all well and good. India should establish the proper facts on the ground. India should establish the infrastructure on the border that ensures that the territory remains in firmly in Indian control. What happened for decades after 1962 is that India totally neglected the infrastructure along the borders with Tibet, whether it
yeah.
is in the Ladakh sector or whether it is in the Arunachal sector. And the warped thinking, the thought process was and the justification for this was that if you construct roads and railways, it will help invading Chinese soldiers to make deeper forays and inroads into India. So let's just completely neglect the development of these regions and not build any roads, no construction. And while we were essentially sleeping for decades, the Chinese were reinforcing their infrastructure along their side of the LAC, whether it is in the Arunachal sector or the Ladakh sector. So after 2014, the new government, the Modi government, has gone ahead with a concerted infrastructure building effort in these regions. You go to Ladakh, you go elsewhere, you will see that the border roads organization is working day and night. You go there, you will actually see it. No matter what the weather is, even if it's snowing, even if there is hail, they're working day and night. They're building roads in extremely inhospitable terrain. So what India needs to do, see, the recent 2017 border incident, the 2020 incident that we had with the Chinese, all of this is because China is feeling threatened that India is now close to achieving, or on its way to achieving, a certain amount of parity with the kind of infrastructure they have along the LAC. So that's why they are feeling rattled, and that's why they are trying to push back against India. And India has, despite all these issues, India has continued with the infrastructure building activities. So what India needs to do is ignore these Chinese, words don't matter. Like I keep saying, words don't really matter. Facts and actions matter. So they have issued a map they've renamed certain words with Chinese words. That doesn't matter. What really matters is what are the facts on the ground. So India needs to keep on India needs to not slack off, and India needs to keep on building the infrastructure, whether it is roads, whether it is bridges, whether it is railways, whether it is tunnels, whether it is airports. All of this needs to keep on happening, and India needs to reasonably soon, achieve at least parity with the Chinese infrastructure on the other side of the temporary LAC. Yeah, so that's how India should respond. And of course, there will be diplomatic pushback as well. I'm sure the Ministry of External Affairs would have given out a statement rejecting these baseless Chinese claims and all that. So there are actions we can take on the diplomatic level. There are actions we can take via the media. There are actions we can take which we are taking on the ground. So the real action that we can take and we should take is the actions on the ground of continuing to create the infrastructure. So China is essentially a long-term adversary for India, and the entire problem, the China problem that we are facing, was created by our previous governments in the 1950s and 1960s. It was the great Mr. Nehru who allowed the Chinese to conquer Tibet. He actually supplied the Chinese troops, the starving Chinese troops, with rice. Indian rice. And that's how the Chinese PLA soldiers who were starving, they were a ragtag army. Because of Indian aid, because of Mr. Nehru's aid, they were able to conquer Tibet. And that's the beginning of the issue. So today we have this issue, which is a legacy of the Nehruvian era. Now we need to find a long term solution to this. And this is something which is going to take time. If the Chinese truly want peace with India in the long run, then they will have to come to the negotiating table and settle the border, the boundary issue. We've had round after round, I don't know, 20, 30, 700, I don't know how many rounds we've had of border talks, but the Chinese, nothing ever comes out of it. And it's all because of Chinese intransigence. They are not interested in demarcating the border so that they can keep on pressurizing India. When you are a stronger, more powerful nation, you want to keep the pressure on. So that's been their strategy until now. Now let's see how it goes, because they are facing the heat from the US, and nobody else trusts them. There are so many issues they are facing: the demographic disaster which is impending, the economic downturn that they are facing, so many issues. So if the Chinese really want to have peace with India, they need to come to the negotiating table and ensure that the border is demarcated within a certain time frame. Obviously the demarcation of the border will need some compromise from both sides, some give and take, but we can negotiate that in an honorable and proper manner. So that has to be India's position in the long run. And the long term, the real solution to the India China issue is that Tibet in the long run should be free again. Tibet has always been a buffer state between India and China for like 2000. You see, the Chinese civilization is about 2000, 3000 years old, if you want to be charitable to them. So as long as this civilization has existed, the Tibet region has been
It's like a
essentially a
buffer.
buffer zone. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Tibet, once it is free again in the future, then India and China will be at peace. Until then, it's going to be problems.
Beautifully explained, Bijiji. So, is development of infrastructure. Do you think that the Modi government's Look East policy will strengthen whatever efforts you're talking about?
So I think it was previous governments that spoke about the look east policy, which was to look for ways to engage with the Southeast Asian nations. That's what the look east policy was about. And today the Modi government has an act east policy in which we are engaging much more strongly with nations like Vietnam, with the Philippines, with Laos, Cambodia, all the nations in the Southeast Asian region, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and all that. So when it comes to the look east or the and the act east policies, it's about engagement with the nations of Southeast Asia and Eastern Asia as well. Japan also obviously is included in that, so is South Korea, etc. But the infrastructure building that I spoke about has nothing to do with this with the look east or act east policy. The infrastructure building is a totally different project that the Modi government has embarked upon. It's about strengthening India's border regions and ensuring that they are firmly under Indian control, and they are completely safe from Chinese incursions, because the Chinese have this strategy of salami slicing. They will take 1 inch of a territory at a time and keep on doing that over and over again until they have made inroads for several kilometers. That's what they have done in the past. And the infrastructure building, road building, railway building is going to ensure that they cannot go further anymore, because now we have concrete structures that are completely Indian and which are under Indian control and patrolling. So this is why the Chinese are so rattled. When it comes to the act east and look east policies, it's about engagement with nations in the Southeast Asian region. For instance, we recently sold 3 batteries of BrahMos missiles to, I believe, the Philippines. And you will have other sales also happening, arms sales and investments and all that. So that's what the act east and look east policy is about, actually.
Moving on, commenting on a UN report about India's population possibly surpassing China's this year. Everybody's been talking about this. So, the China's foreign ministry has said that when assessing a country's demographic dividend, we need to look at not just the size but also the quality of its population. Size matters, but what matters most is talent resource. Some people are saying that this statement is an affront to India. Do you agree? And any insights on the merits of the statement?
Right. So the Chinese foreign ministry recently has said that the demographic dividend of a nation depends on the quality of the population, while referring to India. So we can look at it from 2 or 3 different perspectives. The Americans are trying to paint this as a Chinese insult to India. I mean, they would like to see more, infighting or fighting between India and China, which is something that the Americans which is desirable to the Americans. So we have this guy, I don't remember his name. He's from Rand Corporation. He put out a tweet saying the Chinese have insulted India. Here's how we can look at it. First of all, there is some truth to what the Chinese are saying, and I hope the audience doesn't get all emotional. And look, and hear me out. The Chinese have a better quality of education than India. Their education is purely in the Chinese language. There is no colonial language involved. Indians think that the English language is a great boon from the gods. And because we can speak in English, that's why we can do science, because without English, there is no science. These people are deluded because science came out of India when India spoke Sanskrit. So one aspect is indeed true. India's education system is terrible. India's education system is nothing but a continuation of the 19th century colonial education system. So from that perspective, what you see is that when students come out into the you know into the working pool, when they come out of school, college, university, and they go out and seek jobs, they are completely confused and clueless. They are not confident, capable young people. And when they get a job, they have to be trained all over again, a process that takes at least 6 months. So the education system is a failure. It's a complete failure. It doesn't produce young, confident people. It is designed to churn out clerks and peons. It is not designed to churn out leaders. So there is clearly some truth to what the Chinese are saying. So we have to look at it from that perspective, first of all, that there is some merit to what they are saying. Our education system is a joke. Unless we improve the education system and overhaul and reform it completely, India is going to keep on producing clueless, underconfident young people who have no idea what they going to do in life. So that's number one. Secondly, the quality of the population they speak about. So let's take a look at the quality of the Chinese population and compare it with the Indian population. The populations are roughly the same. Okay, here are India may have surpassed or may not have surpassed the Chinese population. That's beside the point. The populations are essentially the same. The number. What is the average age of the Chinese population? I'm not sure what it is, but it's way ahead of, way more than what India's average age is. What is the total fertility rate in China? It's around 1.1. It has crashed drastically. Okay, so the Chinese total fertility rate is 1.1. In India, it's 2.0. So India's demographic dividend is going to continue for at least the next one generation, minimum 20 years. China has already peaked and it is crashing now. By 2050, the average Chinese person is going to be 58. Imagine a nation where the average person is 58 years old. But in 2050, the average age of the Indian person is going to be 38. Which is not very young, but it's a generation less than China. So they're talking about the quality of the population. Let's we are a long term people. We are civilizations, India and China both. We think in terms of centuries. Our plans are measured in centuries. So 2050 is like the day after tomorrow for us. Okay, so let's wait until 2015, then let's talk about the quality of the population. I can assure you that by 2050 India will have overhauled much of its problems. The colonial legacy, the foreign language that we labor under, the horrific education system that we are under, and other things as well, which I will not go into now. And let's see what China is by that time. By 2100, the Chinese population is projected to become roughly half of what it is today, and the average age could well be in the 70s. It's going to be a nation of old geriatric people. Who's going to man the borders? Who's going to fly their fighter planes? Who's going to labor in the industries? That's the quality of population. So on the one hand, we have to be cognizant of the deficiencies that we have in the nation. On the other hand, let's show some facts to the Chinese. The Indian population is yet to experience the actual demographic dividend. The Chinese are in decline. Their economy is declining. They say that their GDP rate of growth is 5% or something per year. I think these are all fabricated figures. I think the facts have already been brought out into the limelight. The Chinese economy is most likely contracting, GDP contraction. That's what's most likely happening. And nobody trusts China anymore. Their Belt and Road Initiative is dead in the water. Their maritime Silk route has no more takers or buyers. Everybody is trying to bring their manufacturing sector out of China. So that is the quality of China that we are seeing right now. So on the one hand, we have to agree that there is an element of truth to what they are saying, but overall, big picture, they are staring at a demographic disaster, and grapes are sour, and they are feeling jealous, and that's why they are issuing such statements. China is still a powerful nation. It's going to remain a powerful nation for the next 20, 30, 40 years. But eventually, we know that the only nation in this century that can surpass the US economically is India, and no other nation. So that's what I would like to remind our Chinese friends.
Thank you, Abhijit ji. There were some stark realities that you pointed out there, but one thing I want to ask is that do you think that the three-child policy that China is now bringing in is it going to aid them in any manner, or like is it going to change the situation in any way, and how sooner or later?
Look, even if they have a five-child policy, I think it's a little too late now. They've had a one-child policy for God knows how many decades, and it takes another. It will take at least that much amount of time again, more, to try and effect a turnaround. But by that time, the average age of the population will be way too high. So the reproducing population is going to be smaller and slower. So even if they have a three-child policy or a five-child policy, I don't see it working. That's why all the projections say that by 2100 their population, no matter what they do with it, is going to be roughly half of what it is today. Right now it's 1.4 billion. By 2100 it's going to be roughly around 700 million, which is half, which is a disaster, which is a catastrophe by any standards. So they are now understanding and realizing the folly that they put their population through. And and they're trying to close the stable doors after the whole horses have bolted. That's what's happened. So I don't think it's going to really make much of a difference. And now the Chinese population is so tired of the Chinese Communist Party's extremely harsh, iron fisted rule. The Chinese vaccine was the worst performing vaccine in the world. The American and Western vaccines have killed more people than they have saved, but the Chinese vaccine did not work at all, because of which the Chinese were forced to impose extraordinarily harsh lockdowns on their population for months and months on end. And people got so fed up that they have decided that the only way to protest against the Chinese government is to stop having children. So there are people who are refusing to have children just as a form of protest, because no other form of protest is anymore available to them. That's how harsh and powerful the Chinese Communist Party is. But give it a few decades and see what happens to China. If people stop having children, it's going to destroy the nation. And that's what the Chinese Communist Party is staring at. So the next 20, 30 years, they're going to have a powerful nation and a rich nation. But yeah, they're going to get way older before they get even reasonably rich. And that's what they are staring at now.
Wonderful way to answer the question. Moving on, I want to now move on to the Ukraine, Russia, and India equation. So, Ukraine has recently asked India for more medicines and medical equipment, and it has also invited Indian companies to help rebuild the country. Its foreign minister also termed India Vishwaguru, invited the PM to Kiev, and urged to be considered for the G20. Further, earlier the EU had wanted India to step in to speak up against Russia's invasion. So, what do you make of this sudden cozying up to India? And do you see any changes in Indo Russia relations?
Right, great question. So one term that really annoys me is Vishwaguru. I don't want India to be Vishwaguru. I want India to be the number one economically strong nation in the world. You can only be a guru, and you can only be prosperous, and you can only be culturally advanced if you have sufficient uh, excess money. You know, what do you do with your excess money? Certain nations do certain things with it, and so with excess wealth. So once you have sufficient wealth to feed your population and take care of the basics, then you're gonna make have excess wealth. Now that is what comes in handy when it comes to building culture and becoming a Vishwa guru. So first of all, we have to think of the economic and military angle, and only then afterwards, when we have dealt with all the issues, can we think of being a Vishwa guru. So Indians have this wonderful compulsion, this wonderful uh, idea that India should be Vishwaguru. No, India should be the most powerful nation in the world. Then in the future, we may or may not become Vishwaguru. That's not that important. So if other nations are trying to use the term Vishwaguru for us, it is a blatant and naked attempt at flattery. So flattery always worked with India in the past. You flatter the Indian diplomats and the Indian government, oh, they will do anything you want. Well, it's not going to work anymore. This is 2023 or whichever year it is, and this India and this Indian government and this this diplomatic dispensation is very different. Flattery doesn't work. So the Ukrainians want Indian companies to come and rebuild the country. Let the war end, then we will think about rebuilding your country. The war, it may proceed in certain directions that the country may no longer exist in, who knows how long. Or maybe Ukraine becomes another Korea like situation, a divided nation. That's a possibility. North Korea, South Korea. So rebuilding the country, we can think of it after the war is over. It's too early to think about rebuilding the country. And secondly, if you want us to rebuild your country, what is our ROI? You want us to rebuild means you want us to invest our money in your country. All right, wonderful. What ROI are you offering us? What is the return on investment you're offering us? In business, it's all about return on investment. I'm going to make an investment if I can safely say that okay, it's not always safe, but I can project within reasonable
Project profitability. Yeah.
projections that within a certain amount of time I can recoup my money and then make a certain amount of profit. Well,
Yeah.
that's how the world works. It's not all charity. Now they want medicines and all. Yeah, sure, we can send some medicines and we can send some stuff. We even sent medicines and equipment and rescue teams to Turkey, who are Pakistan's allies. So we are willing to help even the enemy. So that from that perspective, we can certainly send some charitable equipment, some charity to Ukraine. We can do that. But listen, Ukraine is not India's friends. They're not our friends. The EU has to first of all prove that it is India's. Well, there are no friendships in geopolitics, but it is favorably inclined towards India. Recently what happened is that which nation was it, Serbia or whichever it was, it has applied to become part of the EU, and one of the conditions was that they need to stop giving Indians visa on arrival. So these
Yeah.
actions, they tell a certain story. Yeah, that the EU is not that favorably inclined towards India, predisposed towards India. So if such is your attitude towards India, then why should we give you gifts for free? You want us to talk to Russia and have them stop the war? Why? What is in it for us? That's see, war is bad. Let's make no mistake about it. War is bad. War is terrible. War hurts so many people, especially defenseless innocent people, men, women, children. But war has always been a fact of life. You could look at the past 10,000 years of human history. All geopolitical events are essentially done on the back of war. So warfare has always been part of human activity. I am not a fan of war, but warfare is a fact of life. It happens all the time. The Americans are the biggest warmongers in the world. Look at their history in the past 200 years. So if the Europeans or whoever else wants the war to end, let's try and understand why the war started in the first place. Why did the war start in the first place? Something triggered it off. What was it that triggered it off? It was NATO's relentless eastward expansion that eventually forced the Russians to take certain actions that they really did not want to take. So if the blame for the war lies somewhere, it's not with Russia, it's with the NATO, it's with the EU. So if they want the war to end, they need to take certain steps to make it end. It's not our prerogative, it's not our responsibility to mediate in a war or to end a war that they have started. So all of this talk is nice. Obviously, if there is something tangible in it for us, then we can think about it. Yes, but offer us something tangible. That is simply the way the world works. It's all about give and take. That's how geopolitics is. It's about power, it's about resources, and so on. So if they want us to play a role in maybe mediating a negotiated end to the conflict, they have to offer us something tangible. Otherwise, why should we go and spend our energy and time and resources in trying to end somebody else's fight? It's not our fight. It doesn't affect us. It's actually benefiting us. We are getting so much discounted oil from Russia, which we were not getting earlier. The Russians were earlier causing up with Pakistan to a certain extent. That has to some extent ended. So why should we do things that are not in our
In
that
our
are going to be
interest.
disadvantageous to us? So that's what I would say about this.
So basically, you are saying that we can do charity, all right, but if you want our business, then you have to show us the ROI.
Yeah, sure. Certainly, yes.
Yeah. All right. Great answer. Abhijit, one more thing. As someone who's just foraying into geopolitics, I don't have much idea about it. Why don't you? You made a statement saying that geopolitics is not about friendships. Then what would you say is geopolitics about? What governs the relations between nations?
Geopolitics is essentially about self-interest, national interest. Every nation has a certain uh, you could say a certain national vision, a certain set of national interests. There are some core interests, there are some peripheral interests, and so on. So every nation wants something. Every nation wants to get somewhere by so and so time. So we
Yeah.
know what we want in India. We want India to become more powerful. We want India to become, there should be no more poverty in India. India should become a developed nation. India should regain its old greatness without infringing upon the rights of others. So we know what India's national vision and aspirations are. We know that. Similarly, every nation has a set of such interest in a certain vision. So when, and every nation is going to promote and further those interests, and sometimes you have to do it at the expense of others. For instance, what is leadership? Leadership is about serving your nation and its people, and not serving others. So if a nation says that, if a leader says, I want world peace, that person is not fit for leadership. What you need as a leader to do is to promote the interests of your nation and its people only, even if they have to be, if even if it has to be done at the expense of the people and the interests of other nations. That's simply how geopolitics has always worked. So the core principle of geopolitics is self-interest. Now nations form alliances when you have two nations whose interests align, then they will work together. When you have nations whose interests, they are in opposite directions, they're gonna typically end up in conflict, or otherwise they will simply ignore each other if they're far apart. So geopolitics essentially, you could say, is a sport, and you make up the rules as you go, and the objective, if you are a big player, is eventually world domination. It's about power, it's about resources. So, what does look at the actions of the US? They want to essentially control the world and control all the oil in the world. And to control all the oil and all the trade routes, you have to build a powerful military that can control all these areas. So that's
Yeah.
typically how it's done. And sometimes you install proxy dictators in certain African nations to get what you want from those nations, to get it for cheap, and that's how it is. So. That's what geopolitics is about. It's about the national interest. It's about the quest for power and resources, and creating infrastructure and all that. And it's about allying or aligning with nations whose national interests match or converge with yours, and otherwise you typically have an adversarial relationship with certain nations. So that is overall what geopolitics is about, and you can actually tell just by looking at a nation's geography what its national interests are. And you can also tell simply by looking at the map what a nation, who are certain nations enemies. You can just tell. So for
It's
instance,
more
if you
like
look at
war
India.
strategizing.
Sorry.
It's more like war strategizing.
Well,
What
from a
used to
certain
happen in
perspective,
ancient times.
it's like a game. If you are really powerful enough, it's like a game for you. But then the chess pieces and the pawns are ordinary people, and sometimes you gonna end up killing them. So like people like Mao Zedong and Joseph Stalin, they typically made lines on a map, and that these lines would typically kill 10,000 people. That's what these people sometimes did. So the map itself tells you what a nation's strategic interests are, and who their adversaries could be, and who their allies could be.
Great. Or speaking about placing our interest over someone else's interest, or speaking about placing the nation's interest before another nation's interest. What would you say about this debate that's been going on the social media about whether Churchill played any role in the Bengal famine in India? As an expert on history, do you think he had a role which is now being attempted to be whitewashed?
Look, the entire narrative of history has always been controlled by the West, essentially by the English speaking people. The Anglo-Saxon Empire, which used to be the British Empire, now it's the American Empire, which is a continuation of the British Empire. So the entire narrative has been set by them, and their narrative has always had currency in India. All our history textbooks are written from their perspective, right?
Yeah.
So Churchill and the British, if you read our history textbooks, it's all about the Turks who first ruled India for about for a certain amount of time, and then the British, and how the British reformed India and did so many good things about India. And they typically speak about about various like Lord Ripon and Lord Bentinck and Lord Curzon and whoever else in glowing terms. And the
Yeah.
British gave us this and gave us that. They gave us railways, they
Railways.
gave us roads, they gave us the English language, they gave us the judiciary, because we never had anything before that, right? We never had anything before that. uh, so when it comes to Churchill was a monster. He was at least as big a monster as Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler killed how many Jews? uh, I mean, how do you quantify evil these days? There is some stupid debate going on in social media about me and Ranveer Alabadi are whitewashing Hitler's crimes. I mean, Hitler was a monster, but how do you quantify evil? At the largest scale, the only way to quantify evil is to see how many deaths a person caused.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
more deaths you cause, the more evil you are. Actually, evil is evil. Everybody has a little bit of evil somewhere in them, I suppose. And some people they bring it out in the real world. So Adolf Hitler, I believe, killed between 4 to 6 million Jews and Romani people. The Romani people are typically neglected, but yeah, the Romani were also there. So let's say six. Churchill killed between 6 to 8, maybe 6 to 10 million Bengalis only in Bengal. So, from that perspective itself, Churchill was a bigger monster than Adolf Hitler. If it upsets some people, they can go take a hike. All right, Churchill was a bigger monster than Adolf Hitler, and yeah, some people say that he was not really the cause of it. Well, we had all the grain in India which was supposed to go to the people of Bengal. It was all diverted to Greece and god knows where, and the famine was artificially created. The British have a lot of experience in creating artificial famines. They did that in Ireland in the 1890, whenever the great Irish potato famine. They killed off I don't know how many million Irish people, innocent men, women, children. They did that right next door to where they sit in the British in the British Islands. And in India, they engineered hundreds of artificial famines, and only some of them have been recorded. And overall, the death toll in India was close to 200 million. In just 40 years, between 1880 and 1920, the British killed more than 100 million Indians through artificial famines and other repression. In the aftermath of the First War of Independence, 1857, the British killed about 10 million Indians in reprisals. The overall death toll of British occupation in India will be at least 200 million Indian lives, innocent Indian lives, and they siphoned off at least $45 trillion worth of money and treasure out of India. The British are monsters. I have nothing against the people who live today in Britain, in England. It's not their fault. Some of them still want to glorify what their ancestors did. I have an issue with those people. So, Churchill was one of the great monsters of all time, and some people want to whitewash him. If you go to the White House, if you go to the Oval Office, I'm sure there is a statue of Winston Churchill there, a bust of his face. So he is still portrayed as some great, wonderful, brave person who defeated Hitler. Well, the truth is that he was worse than Hitler. So I think at least Indians should be in no two minds about this. Churchill was one of the greatest monsters who ever affected India. There have been many more, definitely, and bigger monsters than Churchill as well. But definitely, if you want to compare Churchill and Hitler, Churchill was far worse. I'm not saying Hitler was not evil. Hitler was a monster for sure. He killed between 4 and 6 million Jews in Romania. I mean, that clearly is a monstrous act. But Churchill was worse, from my perspective.
And in terms of barbarity, do you think the Mughals beat the Churchill, or was it the other way around?
Oh, definitely, definitely. The Turks, we call them the Mughals for some reason because we are trying
But
to
they
ascribe we're trying to divert the attention from the Turks and place the blame on the Mongols. But actually, these people were
beat
Turks,
the Turks.
the
Yeah.
ones who we call Mughals, and whoever history teachers and professors and textbooks call Mughals. They,
Mughals.
the genocide they perpetrated on India. I mean, if I give you the number, people, the audience, I would say 80% of the audience will say you're stupid and you're lying and you've invented these numbers out of thin air. I think the death toll over several centuries must have been around 500 million in India. Half a billion. This is by far the worst genocide in human history. And it was not just a demic genocide, I mean, killing of people over centuries and centuries. It was also a cultural genocide. They tried their best to wipe out Indian culture. It failed because we don't have a centralized structure. In For the Catholics, they have a pope. So you take out the pope, the structure crumbles
You have
unless they can reappoint a new
dictats.
pope. In our case, it's all decentralized. We have temples in every house. You can destroy the big temple, but the faith will continue. So they
Yeah.
tried their best to wipe out India's culture. They have failed. It still exists. The flame still burns to a certain extent. But the demic genocide was horrific. The population of India dropped by 80 million I don't know from what date range to what date range. But when you have the birth rate continuing as it is for several centuries, but the population drops by 80 million, if you actually do the proper math, then you will see that the death toll would have been in the hundreds of millions. The New York Times itself says that what's his name, the Aurangzeb, he killed off between 6 and 10 million Indians. The New York Times gives extremely conservative figures. Aurangzeb was one of the longest ruling Turkic kings in India, and he was most likely the most brutal Turkic king in India, and he definitely killed more than 6 to 10 million Indians. So, and if you read their records of their conquest and their all that in India, their historians, you will see that they glorify what they did, and they don't try to whitewash it. So there is so much evidence, but our historians have they've shrunk from trying to construct a proper death toll. How many Indians died between, let's say, the 8th century and the 18th century, when the Turks were finally defeated. Well, they did not rule all of India at the same time. It took them centuries to make even inroads into northern India. The invasion started in the 7th or 8th century with Muhammad bin Qasim, the Arab, and then you had the Turkic invasions that came in from the northwest. It They were first able to take Gandhar and turn it into Afghanistan. Afghanistan was the first Kashmir. Then slowly they made inroads into Sindh and northern India, Punjab, that region. Slowly, it took them centuries to reach Delhi. Then you had the Delhi Sultanate and so on. That's the whole history. So the resistance that our ancestors offered, was immense. It was immense resistance. Iran, Persia fell in 20 to 30 years. It was totally, the religion was gone in 30 years. That's what happened. That's how rapidly it disintegrated. In the case of India, they still haven't succeeded in doing what they did to Persia. So in India, the resistance continued for centuries. It continued until the end, until the Maratha Empire destroyed the Turco-Mughal Empire and established a proper liberated India. And that's what the British destroyed. There are so many people who believe that the British rescued India from the Turks, from the so-called Mughals. No, the British destroyed the Maratha Empire, which went all the way up to Afghanistan. That's what the British destroyed. They destroyed a free India. So yeah, so that's the thing. So the Turkic genocide of India was the worst genocide in human history. The death toll could be in the figure around the figure of 500 million over several centuries. And if you have a death toll of 500 million over 500 years, it's just a million a year, which is in a subcontinent sized place like India. It's not even going to be very visible if you're killing a million people per year over such a large area. And you keep on doing that for 500 years, you're going to have a death toll of 500 million. So it's not that far fetched as some people make it sound.
Right. And speaking of Mughal rule in India, or Turkic rule in India, as you are now terming it, or as you have thrown light for all of us, it's been in the news a lot lately in terms of what's taught in the history books. So, who would you say that were the five Hindu kings or warriors who were equally powerful during the Turkey rule in India, but are not highlighted aptly in books? Who would be on your list?
So I would say that it was mostly the Rajputs who fought the Turks and resisted them for a very long time. You had Bapa Rawal, who the history textbooks kind of ignore, who essentially for a certain amount of time he actually defeated the Turks in the Punjab region. Essentially, to a large extent, the Pakistani held temporarily Pakistani held Punjab region. The city of Rawalpindi is named after Bapa Rawal, so he was a Rajput warrior and king. So you had him. Who else did we have? We had Prithviraj Chauhan. I mean, he has been greatly maligned for sure, but he was a very brave man, and of course, he at the end he lost his kingdom and all that. But he was a great warrior, and he offered very stiff resistance to the Turks. You also had Maharaja Jayachandra. Jai Chand, people say Jai Chand was a traitor. He was no traitor. He was a great man. So he himself was a great warrior, and he resisted the Turks. And there are so many other examples. Rana Kumbha we had. So we had so many people, so many warriors, so many kings. We had Rani Naiki Devi, who defeated Muhammad Ghori. Was it Ghaznavi? Was it Ghori? I always get these two mixed up because I don't like them and they are the same to me. So I don't know which one it was, but she defeated one of these terrorists in a battle, in the battle of Kayadara or Kashadara. I don't remember the name of the place, in between Gujarat and Rajasthan, in that region. And she sent him packing. So we had so many such rulers, so many unsung rulers who are completely forgotten today. I mean, who remembers Rani Naiki Devi? Nobody remembers her. Nobody writes about her in the textbooks. But she defeated the terrorists who eventually became the great, destroyer of certain parts of India. So we had so many such unsung heroes, some of whom I may not even know about, but we definitely had that. And it's very clear from the fact that we resisted the Turks and their advances into India for close to 5 centuries before they were able to take Delhi and establish a small sultanate, which eventually became larger.
I would love for you to tell us the story of about how Jay Chandra was not a traitor.
So there is this account called the Prithviraj Raso. The Prithviraj Rasa was written by what was his name? Chand Bardai or something. The name of the writer. It was it was an account of the greatness and bravery of Prithviraj Chauhan. I think it was written after he died, if I am not mistaken. I haven't read it, but I have read about it. Uh, so it says that there was this rival king called Jayachandra. Now he's called Jaychand, who wanted to marry the lady that Prithviraj Chauhan eventually married, Sanyogita. And because Prithviraj Chauhan turned out to be the better man or whatever, and he was able to marry the lady, so Jaychand was very upset and very jealous. And I think it is claimed in that account that Jayachandra invited the Turks to come and invade that part of India, and that is what eventually led to the defeat and demise of Prithviraj Chauhan. That's what this one account claims. There is no evidence that supports or backs up this account. And what we know about Maharaja Jayachandra was that he was a builder of temples and he did a lot of good work and he was a good king. So there is no evidence that corroborates this allegation that he had invited the Turks to invade India and defeat Prithviraj Chauhan. There is nothing whatsoever that backs up this outlandish, ridiculous claim.
But are there any accounts to the contrary,
Accounts to the contrary, in which sense?
which say that he was in fact a great king and he did not betray, Prithviraj
So
Chauhan?
I don't think anybody has tried to rebut this claim as such, because for whatever reason, from those times, it's not like we have social media. Somebody makes a claim and then somebody makes a counter claim, and you have this war, and then you go on the 9 p.m. debate and you have a shouting match at each other. It wasn't like that in those days. So but what we know is that where Maharaja, the region that Maharaja Jayachandra ruled over, and I believe there are accounts that he was a builder of temples and he was a just king. I haven't delved deep into this part of history. See, the history that really interests me is ancient India. I have not really, delved deep into the accounts of each king and their careers from medieval times, because those times typically were very depressing times from my perspective, because we were under siege and we slowly gave way to the Turks. So that is a section of, or a portion of history that I have really not delved deep into, simply because it doesn't interest me. But what I know is that Maharaja Chaitanya Chandra definitely does not deserve the tag of traitor that has been unfairly put upon him.
Right, right. Do you think that all of these big scientists like Schopenhauer, you have Nikola Tesla, they've referred to the Vedas and they've talked about the Vedas. And in the Vedas itself, in the Vedic philosophy, you have the Sankhya philosophy, which doesn't talk about anything abstract, but it talks about something very concrete. So, do you think that there's any kind of overlap between Vedic spirituality and science?
Uh, when it comes to Schopenhauer, he was a philosopher. When it comes to Tesla or Feynman or Oppenheimer, they were physicists or scientists. So, look, lots of physicists, especially those who work in quantum mechanics and at the cutting edge of physics, lots of them are somehow drawn to the Upanishads, to Vedic philosophy and things like that. I mean, J. Robert Oppenheimer is an excellent example. He quoted a Vedic scripture, or he quoted the Bhagavad Gita when he
Yes,
witnessed
the
the
Bhagavad Gita.
explosion of the first atomic bomb and so on. There is a reason why scientists and physicists who work at the cutting edge, at the bleeding edge of physics, there's a reason why they are drawn towards Vedic and Hindu philosophy. It's because the science they're dealing with, the phenomena they're dealing with, are very strange. The quantum world is extremely strange. It has phenomena that boggle your mind, and there's no explanation for that. We know how to use quantum mechanics. We know how to use it in technology, telecommunications, semiconductors, and so many other things. It's all because of quantum mechanics. Without quantum mechanics, we would not have all these technologies. So we know how to use quantum mechanics and create technologies out of it, but we don't know why it works. We don't know how it works. There is something hidden in quantum mechanics, and certain phenomena are so strange that even Albert Einstein and others, they could not reconcile their understanding of the world with quantum mechanics.
Yeah, there's the EPR paradox, of course.
There's the EPR Rosen, the Einstein Podolsky Rosen paradox. There is quantum entanglement. There is perhaps even retrocausality. There's the many worlds interpretation. There is quantum quantum immortality, and so much more. It's really strange. It's a box of weirdness that you open once you go deep inside into it and go past the mathematics. So once you are faced with this incredible strangeness of the quantum world, you go around looking for explanations that has see typically in science, you look at the past to get inspiration as to how to solve problems that we have in the present day. How have similar problems been solved in the past? That's typically how good physicists would approach a problem. They would not try to reinvent the wheel. They would try and look at what others have done. Now when it comes to quantum mechanics, it's something very new. So nobody has solved these problems in the past. So when you are dealing with such extremely strange phenomena, first of all, it takes a certain kind of mind to want to do that. Most people, they find it so weird they will
Our
not even
tendency to
touch it
reject
without
anything they don't
curiosity.
understand. Yeah.
Yeah. So typically the kind of mind that it takes to tackle quantum mechanics and its problems is the kind of mind that's drawn to very weird stuff, very strange stuff, and the kind of mind that is philosophical and introspective in nature. And that sort of mind is typically drawn to not the Abrahamic faiths, but to Hinduism, to Upanishads and Vedic philosophy and the Bhagavad Gita and all that. So I think I'm not sure whether it was Heisenberg. It was certainly Schrödinger who was, who was
Shooting.
also deeply interested in Indian philosophy. So many of the best minds in physics and in philosophy in the West have gained a lot of inspiration from Indian philosophy. And typically, why would you want to study Indian philosophy if you're trying to solve quantum mechanics problems? It's because there are certain things in Indian philosophy that sound very quantum mechanical. The quantum mechanical, I mean, the idea of the multiverse exists in
Amen.
Hindu philosophy.
Precisely.
If you look at Hindu cosmology, it kind of has a beginning and the end of the universe, and it has a cyclical universe model. So it is only Hindu philosophy and cosmology that kind of makes sense, and it kind of, what we see in the real world kind of echoes that. So that's the reason why scientists typically want to delve deeper into the insights that our ancients had, because it is said that you can research, or you can try to understand the world either by exploring the external universe through instruments, or by exploring the
In the
the
world.
inner universe through meditation and dhyana and all that. And
But we
we our
also
ancestors.
have the concept of Praman. I mean, of Praman,
Yes, yes.
Atman,
So praman, it means evidence. We have
empirical
different
evidence.
there were
Yeah.
different categories of evidence in Indian philosophy. So this is essentially the scientific method, which came out of India a very long time ago. So we had different categories of pramana, which are the best kinds of pramana or evidence. Pratyaksha praman is the most superior kind of praman or evidence, which means it is actually empirical hard evidence. Then you have shabda praman, and you have other kinds of praman which are not as good or as valuable as pratyaksha praman. So the scientific method came out of India. The first atomic theory came from Maharishi Kanad, the atomic theory, or the first quantum theory, and so much more. So we have to understand that a lot of greatness and a lot of good and a lot of knowledge came out of India, and that's why people are so enamored with this idea of Vishwa Guru. I think it's certainly something we should aspire for 100 years from now. But first, let's build the country and make it the largest economy in the world.
Great way to, I think, end the conversation here. You've taken us through so many different topics and lent us insightful views, I would say, and very novel ones. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope that we can do this sometime soon
Thank you so
again.
much for having me. It was a great pleasure, and I look forward to seeing this released.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.